We designed the tour so that we're going downhill for almost all of it. So once we start up here, this is the highest point, and we'll be traveling down, across, and then down. Just one little advertisement. Next weekend, Sunday, June 1st, at 1 p.m. is the 7th annual Forest Hill Cemetery Historical Walking Tour. Forest Hill Cemetery is at 1830 Jefferson Avenue, Dunmore, and it's open to the public and it's free. And also, we are giving a prize out for anyone who noticed on the advertisement sign that it said admonitions instead of admissions.
We raise our hands because the whole town.
And those, the admonitions will be given out later.
We all stood there reading that one.
Part of the job of the Historical Society is to preserve and to present the history of our borough and the people who lived here. So as part of that charter, we felt that presenting information on people who lived in the past would be keeping in line with preserving our history. And we decided that what we would do is, because we have 8 cemeteries within the borough, that we would just take portions of them. And this year, what we decided is that we would do the oldest portion of St. Thomas Aquinas. And technically, we found in 1860, we found a map that has a cemetery listed. And the cemetery is only this small half section. If you take Ash Street and run it straight through to Wayne, it was only the area that was encompassed, and that was the cemetery. So that's the oldest section. It was also, if you notice, there's not many monuments down there, more than likely because the people who were dying, the mines were just starting, they didn't have money, so there were no stones to be placed. Then, in 1870, the pastor of the church purchased all of the remaining land, which was up here and this side here. This, of course, was known as the Old Cemetery. Then, in the 1940s, this segment up here, which people referred to as the New Cemetery, was purchased, and Father McGinley started to do improvements in that section. And we noticed that it's getting filled up rather quickly. But also, Father McGinley purchased all of the land on the other side of Poplar Street. So actually the cemetery continues all the way up for 2 more blocks of unprepared land. So that when we get filled here, you might be up there. If there is a tent down there with some refreshments, there's water, there's also some things that the Historical Society has on for sale. What we're going to be doing is we're going to be starting right here. We'll have the microphone for the person who's going to be presenting, and we'll try to keep everybody on the road. There's only one section where you have to cross through on the grass, but just be careful as you're walking through, making sure you don't twist an ankle or fall in a hole or lean on a tombstone and knock it over. What we'll be doing then is, if we can get as a group, we'll be walking right down the street here for the first one. The grades that we're going to be presenting will have a number marker that corresponds to the program, and there's also a purple ribbon somewhere on the site, so you can identify them, or if later on if you want to come back through. The history that we put in the booklet is just a short summary of what the presenters are going to be saying today.
Dr. John J. Kelly, he's buried right there with that large stone. He was born in 1858 in Trevorton, Northumberland County, Pennsylvania, to John Kelly Sr. and Julia Gaughan. He graduated from the University of Pennsylvania class of 1888 and immediately thereafter opened an office in Archbald. He married Anna Colley on June 27, 1893, and took his bride on a train tour to Atlantic City and several East Coast cities for their honeymoon. They had 9 children. He built his home on the corner of Church and Wayne Streets in 1894. It still stands today. And he had his office in the home. He had a very lucrative practice, and he treated many of the local miners who had been in horrible accidents in the mines. He carried a black doctor bag when he went on house calls, and he'd give the children candy at the homes he went to call on. Elizabeth Durst was the last child treated by him as a 4-year-old in 1915. He died later that year of pneumonia at 57 years old. Buried right there.
Yeah.
Well, for more than 100 years, people have been wondering about this mausoleum. Why is it here? Who's buried in there? Who built it? I can tell you because I am entombed inside. My name is Andrew C. Campbell. Also resting with me is my wife, Bridget Gilroy Campbell. Bridget had a family down on North Main. You Archbald people, that's down this way, in North Main. She had a good family, a brother and sisters. There was a barber in town, M.J. Walsh, P.J. Coolican, very important in Archbald, and Anthony Howley. There were 2 Howley nieces. I offered them space in here, but they got older, went their own way. Bridget's father was postmaster in Archbald, my father-in-law, about 1900. I married Bridget in 1871. There were no children. I was the owner of a hotel on Lackawanna Avenue in Scranton. Maybe some of you younger people, there's a mall or something there now. I was the owner of a 4-story hotel on Lackawanna Avenue. Bridget and I had a beautiful life together. But tragedy struck. In early 1905, Bridget passed. I was devastated. I couldn't live. I came to reside with Bridget's sister, Sarah Gilroy, down in the homestead on North Main Street. At the end of life, I had to sell off, or my people did, my piano, $75, the bedroom suit, the parlor suit, not suite, suit, sold for $25, $30. Now, I'll tell you something about my final days. Father Comerford, a very famous priest, pastor of St. Thomas, not quite as famous as our present curate, but he was well known. We paid him $30 for the Mass. My funeral was on a Sunday afternoon, but the paper said a solemn Mass of Requiem was celebrated on Monday morning. All right, we had not a funeral director, but an undertaker. Right down there on the flag, Martin T. Butler. He was paid $150. I'll mention some prices today and see how they compare to what you know. In my final days, we got medicine from Foote's Pharmacy. Most of you know that. And all of your grandparents know the name of a famous doctor in town, Dr. Van Doren. He helped me in our final illness, paid him $70. And we had a wonderful nurse, Rebecca McCabe. Final payment, $84. She was a good person. There's a Probst name in your town. Peter Probst, the progenitor, he was paid $1 to help us appraise. $1. Now, people have outfits for being buried in, remember that? Well, I didn't have one at that time. This is my hotel outfit today. So we had to get a new suit. $4.50 for my suit. The suit had to be ironed and pressed. $1 to a Mr. Gebhardt, a local tailor. The grave digger was William McHale. Now these were the Campbell graves right here, Bridget and I, this nice smooth area, for 3 years until 1908. The mausoleum was built. I said we had some medicine from Foote's. There was also a little more medicine. The Casey brothers from Carbondale supplied the liquor. $8.45. And at that wake, there were cigars. They paid $6 for the cigars. Maybe this was one of those old Irish wakes. I don't know, $6 for cigars. I did make a will, but there were problems with the Campbell family. They said I should have made the will 30 days before I died. I made it 27 days before I died, so some of the bequests were knocked right out. But some got through. Campbell family, maybe $5. Sister-in-law, $5,000. So there was a back and forth like that. The money for the orphanages and religious charities, it said they couldn't go through. But in the end, the Gilroys got money, and they made a lot of bequests. Some of you have gone to St. Thomas Church down the hill here. There's a statue in the front of St. Anthony. I donated $500 for that. And a statue of the Blessed Virgin from me. Continuing with the will. I left $12,000 for this edifice, but it came in well under cost, $6,000. The contractor, Crawford from Scranton, received $5,700. I'll tell you about some of the incidentals in there. There's an altar inside here, and an altar requires lace and linen, $4.30 inside. The altar needed candlesticks, $3. Now here's something I don't know if anybody here is old enough. There's a card here, one in the center and one on the right. Do you recall before Vatican II, the priest would face away from you and this would be the altar? There were cards. Instead of going to this lectionary or a missal, they were all like, what did it say, when you have a hint from a play. Priest did not have cue card, something like that. Yeah. Well, anyway, some of the one on the left. Some of you have heard the English translation. It's the first gospel, of St. John. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. That was a card right on the altar. Oh, there's so many items to remember. We had a George Siddons, who was the inspector here. $11 for Mr. Siddons. That's a local name. There's a rug. The rug inside then cost $10. Grass seed over here. 10 pounds of grass seed. $2.50 for the grass seed. Now, Sarah and I rested here for 3 years. We had to again call in Mr. Butler to take rough boxes and install them in the mausoleum. $12, not too bad. In the building, you see these 4 granite pillars, $60 for the 4 of them. That was a pretty good buy, $60. Now, you've heard the expression, rest in peace. It was somewhat difficult for Bridget and I in there. There was some vandalism, and the gawkers looking in the window, birds flying through, and another, it wasn't an inconvenience, but on Decoration Day, not Memorial, Decoration Day, our Mass was celebrated right over here, and the priest would use this as a vesting area. Many in a sense.
Is that why it was walled in?
Yes. About 40 years ago, the officials decided the concrete should be placed here. But right inside this concrete is the original door. Bars, wrought iron bars. They look so good. They're right inside there. I'll mention the symbols before we go. You see the top? Well, those flowers, if you see them on the top, they are lilies of the valley, indicating a rebirth, a resurrection, one of the first flowers to bloom in the spring. So that's what that indicates. And here are some first flowers of the spring, lilies of the valley. Now the symbol on top, maybe the sun will be in your eyes. On the cross, it's not a crucifix because there's no corpus on it. On the left, there is a little vertical bar, about 2 inches. Anybody see it? Okay. And in the center, there are 3 parts to that letter. That is H. The first one is I, H, and then you get a sort of a lazy S. I, H, S. People mistakenly think that's I have suffered or in his service. No. Those are the first 3 letters of the name of Jesus in Greek. I, H, S. And that's about it. Someone called Mr. Campbell. I recognized that there's a Cummings. Mr. Cummings was a teamster. He brought in dirt, not soil, but dirt, it says. And he was paid $25.20 for taking in the dirt for this area. So I think this man is going to tell us something about Mr. Cummings.
Thomas Cummings was born to Martin and Anna Moore Cummings in December of 1873 in Archbald. He married Mary T. Nealon in 1901. They had 8 children that we know of. He was a councilman and borough treasurer of Archbald for a time and had a teaming and livery business. He also rented coaches for weddings and special occasions. He delivered the gravel for the Campbell mausoleum and a lot of the coal and ice in the Archbald area. He also had a real estate company called T.C. Cummings and Company. He was a member of the Scranton Lodge of Elks and was widely known in the valley. On April 17, 1912, 2 days after Titanic had sunk, Thomas died of apoplexy, a type of stroke where you go into convulsions. He was only 37 years old. After he died, his wife apparently could not take care of the children, and several of them were put up for adoption, and one was put in a children's home. His daughter Margaret was adopted by the Gilhool family, and she went by the Gilhool name thereafter. She later married John Malone from Carbondale, who was second in command to J. Edgar Hoover in the FBI. Thomas's sister, Mary Jane, who's buried on the other side, she died on December 23rd, 1906, and was buried on December 25th, when they still buried people on Christmas Day. Here we have the Philbin family. Patrick, the patriarch of the family, was born in 1867 and was married to Cecilia Swift. They lived at 310 Laurel Street. Patrick was a prominent citizen of Archbald, being a historian, postmaster, legislator, and journalist. Quite early in life, he was employed on the Scranton Truth, later purchasing the Archbald Citizen in 1898 from the heirs of the Honorable A.F. McNulty. He owned the paper until May of 1909. A year later, Mr. Philbin was appointed Archbald Postmaster. He represented the 5th District in the state legislature for 2 terms as a Republican. He was also elected tax collector, acted for a time as assistant cashier to the Archbald Bank, and was also instrumental in the formation of the Peerless Coal Company. Mr. Philbin died in 1925 at the age of 58. His wife, Cecilia, daughter of John and Mary Jordan Swift, was born in 1877. Incidentally, John Swift, Cecilia's father, the son of Thomas Swift, one of the earlier settlers in the town, was the first child born in early Archbald.
he built a hall for dancing, dramatics, and lectures. Later, it was used by the Knights of Columbus and was located across from the old Archbald High School. Cecilia was a communicant of St. Thomas Aquinas Church and a member of its Altar and Rosary Society. St. Joseph's Children's Hospital, Auxiliary, and the Auxiliary to Ambrose Revels Post, American Legion, Archbald. Mrs. Philbin died February 22nd, 1973, at the age of 96. The Philbins had 4 children. Cecilia, born in 1904, was a graduate of Penn State University and Marywood College. She taught English at Archbald High School for more than 39 years. She enjoyed telling stories of the early history of Archbald and of the many people who contributed to the town's growth. She died in 1999 at the age of 94. Lenore was born in 1907 and graduated from Archbald High School in 1924. Her nickname was Nori. 2 of her quotes from her yearbook were, "Don't be stingy, money can't last forever," and "I never did that." She realized her bachelor's degree in speech education from Columbia University in New York City and received her master's degree from Columbia in 1939. She also studied at the National School of Elocution in Washington, D.C., and at the Emerson School in Boston, Massachusetts. She was the former head of the Speech and Dramatics Department at Linden Hall Junior College in Lidditz, Lancaster County, and at one time was a speech therapist in Philadelphia Public Schools. She taught at the University of Scranton and the College of New Rochelle, New York. An accomplished speaker, she was called upon to read at numerous social affairs. She was also a member of the Executive Board and past president of the Scranton Branch, American Association of University Women, and past president of the Faculty Guild at the University of Scranton. She was also principal of the Sherman School of Expression, Scranton. She died in 1964 at the age of 57. Their 3rd child, Thomas, was born in 1909. He graduated from Archbald High School in 1927 and enrolled in the Wharton School in Scranton. He became secretary and collector for the Peerless Coal Company of Pennsylvania, filling the place left vacant by the death of his father. Genial and cheerful in his work, he made many friends among those whom he came in contact. He was a member of the St. Thomas Holy Name Society and a 3rd degree in the Knights of Columbus, and possessed many fine traits of character. After a week's illness, he died of pneumonia at the young age of 19 in January 1929. The youngest child, Edmund, born in 1911, graduated from Notre Dame University. He enlisted in the Army in 1942. His term of enlistment was for the duration of the war. After the war, he worked in retail management and at one time operated the Grand Movie Theater on Main Street in Archbald. That's right next to Village Florist, as you know it now. He was also an employee of the U.S. Postal Service and later distributed Sturgis pretzels from the building behind Splains Hardware. Edmund died in 1985. The Philbins were one of the Mid-Valley's well-known families.
I make not the talk on behalf of a dead priest, but all the ones who have died and are buried here and who have been the priests in the parish. They say that every priest is chosen from among men to the service of God for the sanctification of men. And in our parish, St. Thomas Aquinas, cemetery, resting here, the priests had no less of a service rendered to them. For it is by the priesthood of the people of God from which a Christian family brings forth a vocation to the priesthood. In a particular way, the graves that we see here next to the Campbell monument, built in 1908, recall a beautiful coincidence regarding the life of the priest in Archbald. A few months ago, a parishioner brought to the rectory a little ticket that was found in a book of postcards from 1906 to 1910. And it's a ticket that says, "Reopening of St. Thomas Aquinas Church, Archbald, PA, Admit 1." And it was at that time, in 1909, when the fire occurred in St. Thomas Aquinas Church, that the stories are well known of all those who gave up many, many comforts, not only to put out the fire and to go and risk their lives, but also to donate their own time and their week's pays in order to rebuild the church, to bring it to the day in 1909 when the church would be rededicated. Shortly after that, when this very monument in 1908, 1909, 1910 occurred, there was a great Eucharistic celebration, a congress in Archbald, at which point the Bishop of Scranton declared Archbald to be the most Catholic town in all of the diocese. Therefore, in the history of the Diocese of Scranton, the church in Archbald, resting at the bottom of the culm pile, is the picture chosen to represent the faith of a people who struggle and work, because the faith is the pearl of great price in order to preserve and protect and to nourish that faith. And the caption of the photo chosen here declares Archbald to be not only singular in the beauty of its church, but also to be instructive of the faith of poor coal miners who decided that since it was the church which was present for them, that they would be in all ways present for the church. And so this ticket reminds us of every priest that served in Archbald, realizing that no priest can find holiness on his own, but sincerely through the goodness of people around him who hold faith to be the greatest treasure. These priests, from Father Holmes right over to our very own Father McGinley, all those who rest here in peace find their eternal rest, yes, because of the faith that was given to them, certainly by their own good works, but most certainly because of the faith of the people whom they served and who in turn served them by revealing to them that there is no greater gift than our precious Catholic faith. Blessed are those who have died in the Lord. Let them rest from their labors, for their good deeds go with them. Eternal rest grant unto them, O Lord. And may they rest in peace.
Amen.
And may their souls and all the souls of the departed, through the mercy of God, rest in peace.
Amen.
Someone's talking. We will put you inside here if you don't stop talking. Okay, folks. This is one of the most unique monuments in our cemetery. This is a mini sarcophagus. And what does the word sarcophagus mean? Back 2,000 years ago, they used limestone. And what does that do to a body? It makes it decompose more quickly. So the meaning of the word sarcophagus, I have it written here, sarco, flesh, and phagus, eater. Flesh eater, but not in modern days. Some cemeteries have a large monument like that, a sarcophagus. The body may be inside, but in these modern ones, the body is underground. The burial here is for Thomas Lockney. Thomas Lockney was unmarried, without chick or child. He lived in Germany, not in Archbald. Now, a little background on this. Most of you are local. Going into German down the hill, there's a little church on the right. Do you know that? The St. James Episcopal Church? Okay. Thomas Lockney, he had some money to spend. He had the priest, Father Healy from German, take care of his, all of his problems and finances. So he wrote, I saw it in writing. Well, first of all, at that church in German, there is a sarcophagus for the pastor who died in 1892, Father Francis Stricker, at the Episcopal Church. Mr. Lockney, in German, really was enthused about that. And you can still see it. It's right off the sidewalk as you go in that dip in German at St. James. And he wrote in his will, directing Father Healy, I want a monument and a gravestone just like that of Father Stricker's at St. James Episcopal Church. So I think this is rather unique here. He said, and I'm going to be buried in the Catholic cemetery in Archbald. It's the only one like it, the only semi-sarcophagus in the entire cemetery. What was the cost? He left $500, but this came in at $225, plus $5 for the grave. That's Thomas Lockney of Germany. Okay, thank you.
Alrighty, what we're going to do is...
Is the body inside there, or is it in the ground?
What was that?
Is the body inside the stone structure, or is it buried in the
The
ground?
question is where is the body? These have the body underground. Mr. Lockney is in the ground.
Patrick Gilmartin, 1812 to 1862. Patrick Gilmartin was born in Ross, County Mayo, Ireland in 1812. He was one of the pioneers of the borough of Archbald. 1836, he immigrated to Maryland. He revisited Ireland the following year and married Ellen Cook in 1838, also of Ross. He returned to America in 1840 to become a contractor on public works. In pursuit of his business, he settled in Archbald in 1845, which was then called White Oak Run. He built the first house on the east side of the Lackawanna River, which is still the residence of his family. He worked for the D.H. Canal Company until 1850, when he opened a general store near his home. According to the 1860 census, Patrick, age 48, Ellen, age 42, had 6 children. Daniel, age 19, born in New York City, who was working as a day laborer. Bridget, age 18, born in Pennsylvania, working as a domestic. Mary, age 16, born in Pennsylvania, also working as a domestic. And there was William, age 14, Thomas, age 12, and Patrick, age 10.
Mr. Gilmartin was killed by a volley fired by a marshal's posse during a draft riot on the 10th of October, 1862, while passing from his house to his store. Mr. Gilmartin had no part in the rioting. He was a merchant up to the time of his death, and he left 4 sons and 2 daughters. Daniel J. Gilmartin, right here, buried here, son of Patrick and Ellen, came to Archbald with his parents in 1845. Daniel serves as the township's treasurer and was 3 times elected to Archbald Borough Council. He also served 3 times on the school board. He's responsible for a great deal of the early history of the borough. Doing Old Home Week in 1915, being one of the first settlers, he's still living, that is, he gave the opening address. He died December 26, 1927.
Jacob Ritter. First of all, a very interesting man researching this guy here. He liked to reminisce about the past, and if anyone knows Tom Cluffer, an excellent historian, this guy he reminds me of Tom. He had to be the Tom Cluffer of his day. I mean, he knew everything about every family in town. Jacob Ritter, or Uncle Jake, Archibald's grand old man as he was called, was born in Oldenburg, Germany on January 10, 1822 near Bingen on the Rhine. And in the prime of his young manhood, he immigrated to America to seek his fortunes, arriving in New York where he remained for a brief time. From there, he came to Dunmore, where he lived for a few months, working his trade as a shoemaker. He later moved to Archbald, where he has since lived and grew in love and the esteem of his fellow man. I think his shop was right across from St. Thomas Church, near where Kenny's funeral home is, in that area there. In his early days in Archbald, Mr. Ritter took a deep interest in borough affairs and served as postmaster of the borough during the short administration of President Johnson, who succeeded the martyred Lincoln. But in the administration of President Grant, Mr. Ritter was deprived of the postmastership for political reasons. Mr. Ritter was appointed court tipstaff by Judge Handley when the county was organized in 1878. Court was then held in Old Washington Hall. Since that time, he has held the position continuously with great ability until 1910, when he retired on account of his advanced age. He felt he could no longer perform his active duties in the manner he desired. Mr. Ritter had charge of every grand jury since Lackawanna County was organized until his retirement. In all these years, he had never been absent from duty except once, and that was due to sickness. Around the court, he was a familiar figure and was known by everyone who frequented the courthouse. And among the judges and lawyers, he had many warm friends. To them, he was known as Uncle Jake Ritter. He had a keen memory of events that happened in the days long past, like Tom, and that made him an interesting and entertaining talker. He saw Archbald in its primitive state when only a few shanties were the only places of habitation, and had many anecdotes to relate to early Archbald. In those halcyon days, his shoemaking shop was a favorite meeting place for the men of the town, and there all topics at the time were warmly discussed. He once told a story of how old-time funerals took place. There were 4 pallbearers on the casket, and depending on how far the deceased lived from the church and cemetery, there could be as many as 50 pallbearers. When the first 4 got tired, the next 4 would take over, and so on, till they reached the burial site. Then, a Mrs. White died in 1850, and her family used a hearse from Carbondale. Since that time, everyone wanted a hearse for their funerals. In his prime, Mr. Ritter was an excellent singer, and it was said there were few bassos in this locality who could surpass him as far as volume and range were concerned. He was one of the leading singers in St. Thomas Choir, and his basso voice was often heard mingled with the choir in the O Salutaris or the Adeste Fidelis. He had 9 children, 39 grandchildren, and 28 great-grandchildren when he died in Archbald on May 14, 1911. The funeral was largely attended.
Which one is his headstone? That big one.
Poor Michael Dunn, one of the most highly respected of Archbald's citizens, died yesterday, November the 7th, at a hospital in Albany, New York. He suffered many years from injuries to his arm, which he received in the Civil War. Last week, his condition became alarming, and he was transferred to the hospital in the hope that a surgical operation might arrest the fatal progress of the malady and alleviate his suffering. He continued to grow rapidly worse, however, and yesterday morning breathed his last. his son Peter, and Professor James H. White of Archbald were with him during his last moments. Few men in Archbald had as many friends as Michael Dunn. His genial, cheery manner was but an outward indication of the genuine Christian charity which filled his heart and upheld him during his years of pain and suffering. Michael Dunn enlisted as a volunteer at the outbreak of the Civil War and served until its close. During the memorable siege of Vicksburg, his arm was shattered by a rebel shell and he was disabled for life. Despite his disability, he was active in all works tending towards the improvement of the community and was a member of Lieutenant Stevens Post's Grand Army of the Republic. His body arrived here by train last evening, and the funeral will take place next Thursday, with a high requiem mass at St. Thomas's Church at 10 a.m. by the Reverend T.J. Campbell. Comerford, sorry. If you would come, we're going to come down to the road, okay, and walk up Pike Street.
Hello, my name is Hannah Bright Malarkey, better known as Annie. I'm married to Patrick Malarkey. He owns the hotel and tavern on the corner of Salem Road and Chestnut Street. It's right over there. Most people remember it as the John Wright Tavern. He's my nephew. Patrick Malarkey was born on June 21st, 1865, right here in Archbald on Salem Road. His father is James Malarkey and his mother is Mary Gaveston. Many times his mother had told him the story of when she was pregnant with him, they were crossing the Atlantic to come to here, to America. Relatives were already living here, and they left his older brother in Ireland because he was too sickly to travel at the time. But when the boat arrived here in Philadelphia, his mother said that the black bunting and decorations were still up on the buildings because President Lincoln had just been assassinated on the 15th of April, just at the end of the Civil War, that year in 1865. Now, Patrick's mother died in 1877, giving birth to Patrick's sister Mariah, who later married Patrick McAndrew. Now, Patrick was really ambitious, and by the age of 15, he had already worked his way up in the White Oak Run mine as a mule boy. And he saved the money so he could build the hotel and the tavern. And he was really successful in town, and everybody really liked him. And, oh yeah, that's right, he was the first to own one of those new fandangled motor and gave everybody a ride in town in that. He loved that car. Kept it in a garage on Chestnut Street behind the tavern. On November 11th, 1918, we were all celebrating the end of a world war. But an epidemic was going around. That was the flu epidemic of 1918. Patrick got sick and died 7 days later. I miss Patrick a lot, but I continued to run the tavern and the hotel. And then on December 18th, 1928, I joined Patrick right here.
If you walk in this area, you'll see a grave marked that reads, Baltimore Mine Tunnel Disaster. One may think it refers to Baltimore, Maryland. That's not so. The Baltimore mine tragedy was the second worst accident in anthracite history, the worst being the Everett disaster. The D&H mine was located in the east end of Wilkes-Barre, where today stands the Home Depot building. The accident occurred as men were entering the slope in mine cars. In violation of rules, there was an explosion, explosives being transported. Shortly after, there was an explosion made much worse by the ventilating fans, which carried the flames down the slope. Various reasons have been given as to the cause of the explosion. It could have been a spark from a cable snapping, a miner's lamp, or tobacco. Those men lucky enough jumped in the creeks alongside the tracks. For others it was said they were roasted, burned to a crisp. At the entrance, when the crowd gathered, men cried, women fainted. On this terrible day, June 6th, 1919, 92 men perished in the coal mine.
And two of those that were killed were my sons, who now rest in this grave. Oh, it's cute. Do you think I need that? They're Michael, who had 2 daughters and 1 on the way. And Victor, he was only 21. He was still unmarried at this time. You may ask why my boys are buried here in the St. Thomas Cemetery. You see, my name is Mary McGowan Harris. I was born in Ireland in 1866, but resided on number 5 Hill. You may recognize the McGowan name. My brother Henry, and my nephews were Harold, Frank, Jean, Mooch, the mailman, and my nieces are Mary McHale and Mary Callahan. I married Michael Harris from Wilkes-Barre, my home, when Victor and Michael lost their lives. The tragedy was so unexpected and sudden, there were no prearranged burial plots, so the boys came here to be beside Joseph. May they rest in peace.
May 6th, 1929. Roman Kurowski, the son of Mr. and Mrs. Louis Kurowski, who lived up here at 181 Chestnut Street. Roman, a much respected young man, received injuries this morning when he was dragged a long distance by his mule, resulting in his death. The young man was on his way to work this morning for the Archbald Hose Company, or the Archbald Coal Company. It was the first day of this new job for him. He was unconscious when he was picked up, and he was tenderly cared for. Every effort was made to restore him, but to no avail. He died in about a half an hour, about 7 o'clock in the morning. Roman was born here 18 years ago and was a strong, vigorous young man and a comfort to his parents. His death is a shock not only to his parents and family, but also to his young companions. His parents have the sincere sympathy of the entire community. Besides his parents, the following brothers and sisters survive him: Anthony, Louis Jr., John, Francis, Helen, and Claire, all from Archbald, and Mrs. John Alexander of Scranton. The funeral will be held from his parents' home Saturday morning at 9 o'clock. A high mass of requiem will be celebrated at St. Thomas Church. He's buried here in St. Thomas Cemetery. When we hear about mine accidents, we hear of many people who died results of the roof falling in, from explosions, from cave-ins. But there were also many people who died from other accidents surrounding the mine, and that was the fate of poor Roman.
In Italian, the name's pronounced Felice. He was born in 1897 in Gallico, Reggio Calabria, Italy, which is a small town at the Straits of Messina. He was one of 7 children. On December 28, 1908, Felice survived the Messina earthquake, which was amplified by a tsunami, which caused extensive damage, and over 100,000 lives were lost. Both of Felice's parents and 2 younger sisters, 3-year-old and 6-month-old, were casualties. Felice was 11 years old when this occurred. He and 2 older sisters and 2 younger brothers all survived. Yet life was very difficult for this family after the loss of their parents. During World War I, he served in the Italian army in Tripoli, Libya, North Africa. Felice departed Italy in October 1922 leaving an expectant wife and son, Paul and son Paul, to come to America and hopefully a better life for his family. He arrived in Buffalo, New York, and worked as a laborer for 2 years. While he was in Buffalo, he contacted some friends in Carbondale, and they convinced him to relocate to northeastern Pennsylvania, where coal was king at this time and afforded steady employment. He arrived in Archbald in 1924, and 4 years later, his wife, Angela, and sons Paul and Joseph, Pepe, arrived in the United States. Life was good for this family, and everything was going well. Felice and Angela added to their family and had 3 more children, Antoinette, Josephine, and Mary. They also had many friends. In September 1934, the lives of 5 families were changed forever due to a tragic event. A shooting occurred at a local hotel on a Sunday afternoon while friends were gathered for a game of cards. The card game Briscoe decided who would be allowed to drink. The winners have a boss and second boss, who have sole designation as to who could drink alcohol and who could not. This was all generally done in fun. On this day, another group joined into the card game after spending time at a clam bake, and things got out of hand. One of the individuals from the clam bake left the hotel and returned with a pistol and a knife. He started shooting, and after his bullets ran out, pulled out a knife and stabbed 2 people. The 2 people that were stabbed died due to their injuries. The 3 men who were shot survived. Felice survived despite being shot in the head, and sadly, Angela, who was expecting their 6th child, died to the trauma of the shooting. She and her unborn child died a month later. 7 months after the death of his wife, the Kalani family of Carbondale, without reservation, suggested he leave the 5 children and a German shepherd with him, and Felice returned to Italy without his family. He returned 4 months later after having married a new wife, Katerina, who joined him in the United States 4 months later. They went on to have a son, Felix, or Phil, and Felice died in February 1965 due to a massive heart attack. That's it. Just one point, the person that did the shooting on that day in September 1934, after his arrest, trial, and verdict, was sentenced to the electric chair, and he was electrocuted 357 days after the shooting. That's it. Thank you.
Okay, today I'm going to talk about my uncle, Joseph Pepe Cindemi. Pep was born March 17, 1923 in Gallico, Reggio Calabria, Italy. He arrived in the United States in December of 1928 at the age of 5. He, his mother, and his oldest brother, Paul, had been detained when they got into the country because I think one of them had pink eye, so it was a week that they were detained before they can actually meet up with my grandfather, who my dad just spoke about. Pepe grew up a shy and quiet young man who made friends quite easily. After completing school, he started driving coal trucks for John Vaccaro Mining, a short-lived career. After working 2 full weeks and receiving $9.60 take-home pay, Pepe's dad told him to give the money back to Mr. John Vaccaro because he needed it more than you did. Pepe worked at various mines for 13 years. Pepe was very mechanically inclined and started working at Polaron Products, in charge of their maintenance and setup, a job he remained at for over 35 years. Pepe started his own electrical business and worked this job in the evenings and on weekends. For many years, Pepe was the only electrician in Archbald and worked in over 50% of the homes from the 1950s to the 1970s. One of my personal favorite stories was Pepe was in the process of rewiring Archbald High School, their shop class, and adding a 440 line. He had my dad here to help him out. Pepe was notorious for never shutting electrical off to anything. So my dad, looking at him, said, "Pep, don't you think we should, pull the meter outside?" And Pep, nah, that would take too much time. So Pep walked over to the rack where they kept all the wood, grabbed 2x4, 2x6, and told my dad, he said, "Put this between me and the wall. If something happens to me," he said, "just pry me away." So for those people who know my uncle, that story's priceless. Pepe was an active member of the Archbald Hose Company No. 1 for over 55 years and was their president for 50 years. He was also a founding member of both the Archbald Lions Club and the Archbald AC. He was a devout Catholic who prided himself on never missing Mass and would always stop by the family members' homes on Sundays to visit. And pretty much, this is Pep's attire for the most part. And his jacket over the tombstone there. Pepe was most proud of his work as a public servant, having been elected as councilman for Archbald Borough, a position that he retained for 32 years. Pepe was assigned to oversee the Archbald Department of Public Works, and to honor him, the borough officials renamed the DPW complex in his name. Pepe was a generous man who would routinely treat the DPW crew to lunch. Knowing that they loved Texas wieners, he would travel to Scranton to Coney Island just to bring them back something that they knew that they would enjoy. A giving man, Pepe also donated his pay for his position as councilman to a charity that would benefit underprivileged children in South America. In 2012, when Pepe passed away, he and his wife Leona had been married for 62 years. Pepe passed away at the age of 88.
With that, we bring our tour to a conclusion. We thank you for being with us today, and we have a couple of special thank yous. We would thank you for Father Sod and Christ the King Parish for hosting us and helping us out with the presentation. We're also very grateful to Chief Tretley and the Archbald Police Department who helped out, the Archbald Community Ambulance and Rescue Squad who was here present, and luckily we didn't need them for anything. It's always nice when you don't have to use them. And to all who helped us out, especially to the members of the Historical Society, because what happened is it was a lot of the members that did the research and explored and wrote up the presentations and then presented them here today. So it was kind of an entire society event with all people participating and helping us out. Just a quick reminder too, we do have a tent over here with water and membership and some of the items that we have for sale. Our meetings are on the second Monday of every month at 7 o'clock in the Archbald Borough Building at 400 Church Street, and they're open to the public. We have various speakers coming in, and all are welcome to come and join us at those meetings. Again, thank you for attending today. Have a good day, and a good Memorial Day.